After last week's blog about how life insurance is an asset class, I got challenged to prove it. So what better way than this week's blog? When explaining permanent cash value life insurance, we show pictures. The first one is a red line, green line graph. The solid red line on the graph shows a client putting an amount of money into a tax-exposed fund. The solid red line shows a curve of that fund that will be in the portfolio as a fixed income asset after tax. We then simply ask a question, that if we could show an instrument which has been around for over 150 years in Canada and 130 years with one particular company, which is an instrument where you put the same amount of money in over the same period of time, but there will be no tax leakage. Because have you ever received a thank you note from Queen's Park in Toronto or the federal tax collectors in Ottawa for paying your tax on time? Have you ever received a thank you note for making that tax contribution for the benefit of 33 million Canadians? That involuntary charitable contribution you make each year called tax that is directed for whatever purposes by the government? When we take the same amount of money and put it in as a deposit into cash value permanent life insurance, what happens is we have a yield curve that is represented by a green line. It is a bigger yield curve. Now in the earlier years, there's a little less liquidity in that curve. There's a little less available. The reason there is a little less available is because the Department of Finance says in the formula that they guarantee, the formula that guarantees lifetime tax protection, lifetime tax shelter, lifetime tax deferral on the growth of the money, it's in exchange for a little limited liquidity in the early years. The reality is it's not a penalty, it's a benefit, because the owner cannot access some of the money in the early years. But for example, if someone bought a ticket to fly from Vancouver to Halifax, they usually don't ask to get off in Calgary or Winnipeg. The good news is with this instrument is that if you had to get off in Calgary or Winnipeg, you could. However, the Department of Finance says that this is not a 100-meter sprint, it's a marathon. So the first thank you note is the bigger yield curve from the same invested capital. As well, a bigger income that can be withdrawn during life, which means if needed as a lifeboat, the individual will never have a bad financial day as long as they live. And ultimately, if it's not needed, it can be donated, turning the lifeboat into a legacy. The second thank you note comes in the form of a blue line. And the blue line is the line on top of the graph, and that's the insurance line. That's the aspect that virtually nobody has any interest in. So even though no one we work with has any traditional need for life insurance in their portfolio, we encourage individuals to look through the window of do I need it versus how can I use it? How can I use it to add value to my own family's financial planning as a lifeboat and then leave it for the benefit of others as a legacy? It is a paradigm shift from do I need it to how can I use it? The nice thing about the blue line, the life insurance line, is that it falls in when the insured isn't even here anyway, so that if the individual does not have any interest in it, it isn't going to affect them anyways, as they're not going to receive the benefit. It's going to be their kids, their grandkids, or their charities. If it does not get used as a lifeboat, it can then be used as a legacy.